Mob boss finds a black nanny dancing for his paralyzed daughter. What he does next shocks everyone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. In the grand, marble-floored mansion of the Romano family, there was an air of elegance that contrasted sharply with the turmoil of one small room upstairs. Inside, a young girl, no older than 6, lay in a bed surrounded by plush toys and expensive furniture, her body paralyzed from the waist down. Her name was Mia Romano, and she had been a joy in her father's life before a tragic accident left her unable to walk. Today, as she lay staring at the ceiling, tears rolled down her cheeks in silent despair. Her father, Don Antonio Romano, the feared mob boss of the region, had tried everything to help her. Doctors, specialists, expensive therapies, they all came to the same conclusion. There was nothing more they could do for Mia. The sound of the baby grand piano echoed through the hallways of the mansion as Mia's nanny, a kind-hearted black woman named Amara, stepped softly into the room. Amara had been with the Romano family for years, caring for Mia since she was an infant, and through the ups and downs of the family's turbulent life. Today, however, Amara did something different. She didn't follow the usual routine. She didn't just sit by Mia's side, offering comforting words. Instead, she slowly walked to the edge of the room and turned on the music, a soft, soothing melody that filled the space. Mia's eyes widened, the faintest glimmer of curiosity lighting up her face as Amara began to move. Slowly, carefully, Amara started to dance, her movements graceful and fluid, a stark contrast to the stiffness that defined Mia's life now. She twirled gently, moving to the music, her dress swishing softly in the air. Amara had always known that Mia responded to music, and in this moment, she was offering her something more than just care. She was offering Mia a chance to experience the joy of movement once again, even if it was only in the form of Amara's dance. The melody wrapped around the room like a warm embrace, and for a moment, Mia's sobs quieted. Her eyes followed Amara's every move, and the weight of her paralysis seemed to lessen, if only for a fleeting second. It was as though, in that dance, Mia could momentarily forget the reality of her condition. She reached out with one hand, trembling slightly, as if she wanted to join in, but her body refused. Amara noticed this and, without missing a beat, gently placed Mia's hand on her own. For a moment, it was as if the world stood still, and the two of them were the only ones who mattered. Just then, the door to the room creaked open. Don Antonio Romano, tall and imposing in his dark suit, stepped inside, his gaze immediately locking on the scene. His cold eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something else, something he hadn't felt in years, surprise. He had always been a man of control, a ruthless mob boss who had seen everything there was to see. But he hadn't seen this. He hadn't seen the gentle, quiet power of a woman who had cared for his daughter like her own. Amara was not just a nanny to him. She was a symbol of sacrifice, of kindness in a world that often lacked both. Watching her dance for his daughter, something shifted inside him. It wasn't just the music that moved him, but the unwavering love and dedication in her actions. He had never known this side of her, the side that was capable of such raw emotion. His heart, hardened by years of violence and power, cracked just slightly. Amara continued to dance, oblivious to the fact that she had captured the attention of the most powerful man in the room. Her focus remained solely on Mia, her movements fluid and comforting, like a silent promise that everything would be okay. The dance ended, and the room fell silent. Mia's tears had stopped, and for the first time in days, a small, genuine smile appeared on her face. The smile wasn't just for Amara. It was a smile for the first time in months, a smile that told Don Antonio everything he needed to know. In that moment, he realized something. Mia needed more than just expensive treatments. She needed love, and she needed the kind of care that only someone like Amara could provide. As he stood there, still processing what he had just witnessed, he knew one thing for sure. He would never let Amara go. The room was still as Don Antonio watched Amara, the black nanny, with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. The music that had once filled the room was now replaced by an awkward silence. He stood at the door, his sharp eyes locked on her, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of vulnerability creeping into his heart. The cold, powerful man who had commanded armies of men was now faced with a woman who had shown him something he had long since forgotten: true compassion. Amara's soft voice, though shaken, broke the silence. "She needed to see joy," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I couldn't let her lose hope." Don Antonio, still standing in the doorway, finally moved, stepping closer to the bed where his daughter lay. Mia had stopped crying, her small hand still resting in Amara's. The soft smile on Mia's face was a stark contrast to the fear and frustration she had shown just moments earlier. The moment felt like a gentle shift in the universe, an unspoken connection between father and Nanny, a recognition of the rare and unspoken bond that had grown between them over the years. For a long time, he had seen Amara only as an employee. She was his daughter's caretaker, a figure of routine and responsibility. But now, seeing her in this moment, he realized just how much more she was. She wasn't just a caretaker. She was the glue that held his fragile world together. She had given his daughter something no doctor could: peace. Amara was still standing there, her face flushed from the dance, her eyes downcast. She didn't look at him directly, not yet. She had always been humble, always respectful, but never one to seek attention. Her work had always been her focus, not her recognition. But in that moment, Don Antonio couldn't ignore her anymore. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice surprisingly soft. It was the first time in years he had expressed gratitude so openly. Amara looked up at him, her eyes wide, clearly surprised. She had never heard him speak with such sincerity before. "You've done something for her that no one else has been able to do," he continued, his voice steady but filled with a new layer of respect. "She's been in pain for so long, and no one knew how to make her smile." Amara, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his tone, cleared her throat. "She needed hope, sir," she said gently. "And sometimes, hope comes in the smallest gestures. Sometimes, it's a dance, a song, a moment where they can feel alive again, even if only for a little while." Don Antonio stood there, processing her words. In the past, he had made decisions that had been swift and brutal. But here, in this quiet room with Amara and his daughter, he realized that not every decision needed to be made with force. Not every problem could be solved with money or power. His daughter needed more than that. "I've seen a lot in my life," Don Antonio began, his gaze softening. "But nothing like this. You've given her something I didn't know she needed. I didn't realize how much she needed someone like you." Amara looked up, her eyes filled with emotion but still guarded. She had been with the Romano family for years, always doing her job, always staying in the background. But the weight of his words made her heart race. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever made her feel like she was more than just an employee. "I just want her to be happy," Amara said quietly, her voice filled with sincerity. "She deserves that." Don Antonio took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on his ability to control everything in his life: his empire, his family, his reputation. But now, standing here with Amara, he understood that there were things beyond his control, things that couldn't be dictated or forced. Mia needed love, compassion, and care that could not be bought or controlled. And for the first time in his life, Don Antonio found himself questioning the way he had lived his life. "I want to make sure she has everything she needs," he said, his tone resolute. "And I want you to be part of that. You've proven yourself in ways I didn't expect. I'm not sure what the future holds for us, but I know that Mia needs you. You've earned my respect, and you've earned a place in this family." Amara looked at him, her heart pounding. She had never imagined that her role in this family would go beyond what it had been. She had never expected anything in return for her dedication. But now, Don Antonio's words had opened a door she never thought possible. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice soft but full of gratitude. "I will always be here for her." "Always." Don Antonio nodded, and for the first time, he felt something he had not experienced in a long time: peace. As he turned to leave the room, he knew that his world had just shifted. It wasn't just about power or control anymore. It was about family, love, and the bonds that tied them all together. And in that moment, Don Antonio made a decision that would change everything. He would never allow anyone to treat Amara as just a nanny again. She was part of their family, and he would protect her just as fiercely as he would protect Mia. The door clicked shut behind him, and Amara stood there for a moment, her heart racing, before turning back to Mia. Mia's eyes were closed now, a small peaceful smile on her face as she drifted off to sleep, the music of Amara's dance still echoing in the air. Amara smiled to herself, her heart light. She had done more than she could have ever hoped for. She had given Mia the chance to smile again. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. As days passed, the atmosphere in the Romano mansion shifted. There was a quiet, almost unspoken understanding that had settled between Don Antonio and Amara. The once cold and distant mob boss now found himself seeking her out, not just for matters concerning Mia, but for advice, for comfort, and strangely enough, even for the warmth of her presence. Amara had always been the steady force in Mia's life, but now, she was becoming a quiet anchor in Antonio's world as well. He had always ruled his empire with an iron fist, but in the presence of Amara's kindness, he began to question the methods he had used to build his success. It had never been about love, family, or understanding. It had been about power. And yet, as he sat in his office late one evening, thinking back on the quiet dance that had changed everything, he realized something important. He had built an empire with the wrong foundation. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Antonio walked quietly down the hall towards Mia's room. The door was slightly ajar, and as he peered inside, he saw Amara sitting beside the bed, humming softly as she held Mia's hand. Mia was asleep, her small chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. Amara, however, was awake, her gaze fixed on Mia, lost in thought. Antonio hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open a little more. Amara looked up, surprised to see him standing there, but she quickly masked her emotions, giving him a polite, but weary, smile. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly, her voice soft so as not to disturb Mia. Antonio nodded, stepping further into the room. "I was just thinking," he said, his voice lower than usual. "You've done more for her than I could have ever hoped for. I don't know how to thank you." Amara gave a small smile, though there was sadness behind her eyes. "You've already done more than enough," she replied. Mia just needed someone to believe in her. Someone who didn't see her as a problem to be fixed, but as a person worth fighting for. Antonio's chest tightened at her words. He had spent so much of his life seeing people as tools, as ways to advance his power, but Amara had changed all of that with just one simple act of kindness. He looked at Mia, his daughter, the little girl who had always been so full of life, so full of potential. But now, she was trapped in a body that refused to cooperate. "I want to change things," Antonio said suddenly. Amara looked at him, confusion evident in her expression. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I want to change the way I've been running things," he explained. "I've spent so much of my life focused on power, on control. I've neglected what really matters. What matters is family. What matters is love. I want Mia to have that. I want her to know she's not alone in this." There was a long silence as Amara processed his words. She had known Antonio to be a man of few emotions, a man who always kept his distance. But now, she saw something different in him. A vulnerability, a desire to do better, to be better. "Antonio," she began softly, "Mia needs you. She needs your love. But she also needs to see that you believe in her, that you're willing to fight for her, just as I have." Antonio nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the responsibility that had just been placed upon him. He had been a man who had never asked for help, but now, he realized he needed it. He needed Amara's guidance, her steady hand, to show him how to be the father Mia needed him to be. "I will fight for her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll fight for both of you." Over the next few weeks, Antonio made a concerted effort to change. He spent more time with Mia, talking to her, listening to her, encouraging her to keep fighting. He took her to therapy sessions, even though the results were slow. He made sure she felt loved, cherished, and supported. And through it all, Amara was by his side, guiding him, offering him strength when he felt like giving up. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Antonio took Mia to the garden, pushing her wheelchair along the smooth stone path. It was a quiet moment, but one that held more meaning than anything he had ever done before. Mia looked up at him, her eyes bright, her face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, can we dance?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Antonio stopped in his tracks, surprised by the question. He had never considered dancing with her. He had always thought it was something she couldn't do. But now, standing there in the garden, he realized something. "Of course, sweetheart," he said, his voice soft. He gently helped her stand, and for the first time in a long time, he held her close, swaying gently to the rhythm of the wind. Amara watched from a distance, her heart swelling with pride. Antonio had come so far in such a short time, and Mia was happier than she had been in months. In that moment, it was clear to her that the bonds between them had only grown stronger. The family, once fractured and cold, was now healing. Antonio had learned that power didn't come from control, but from love. As the sun set, on that quiet evening, Antonio held Mia close, her small body in his arms as they danced beneath the stars. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at peace. The weeks that followed were filled with small but meaningful changes. Don Antonio's transformation had not gone unnoticed, especially by Amara, who now saw a side of him that few had ever been privileged to witness. Gone were the days when he had been a cold, unapproachable figure in Mia's life. Now, he was a father in every sense of the word. The mansion, once filled with the noise of business and the constant presence of bodyguards and associates, now seemed quieter, more peaceful. Amara, who had always been the steady presence in Mia's life, felt a sense of relief knowing that Mia was not only surrounded by love, but was also being actively supported by her father. Mia herself had begun to show signs of progress, even if they were small. Every day, she seemed more at ease, more willing to engage with the world around her. She spent hours in the garden with Antonio, who pushed her wheelchair gently down the stone paths, showing her the wonders of the flowers and trees, things that she had once taken for granted. For the first time in months, Mia's laughter echoed through the halls of the mansion. One particular morning, as the sun streamed through the windows of the large living room, Antonio walked in to find Mia sitting in her wheelchair by the window, her fingers tracing the light patterns on the floor. She turned to him with a bright smile. "Daddy, can we go to the park today?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Antonio, who had been struggling to balance his role as both a father and a mafia boss, looked at his daughter and felt a lump form in his throat. How had he allowed his life to become so focused on power and fear that he had neglected the most important part of his world, his daughter? But now, standing before him, was a child who was rediscovering life and joy, and he realized just how precious these moments were. "Of course, Mia," he replied softly. "We'll go to the park today." He could see the excitement in her eyes as she smiled, and he knew that his decision to change had been the right one. Later that day, they arrived at a quiet park just outside the city. It was a beautiful place, with a small pond in the center surrounded by tall trees, the kind of peaceful spot that seemed so far removed from the world Antonio had built. As he helped Mia out of the car and into her wheelchair, he couldn't help but notice how her face lit up when she saw the playground in the distance. The sight of children running and playing filled her with a sense of longing, but also hope. It wasn't long before Amara arrived, walking toward them with a gentle smile. She had insisted on coming along, sensing how important this outing was for Antonio and Mia. "I knew I'd find you here," Amara said, her voice full of warmth. Antonio turned to her, a faint smile crossing his lips. "She needed this," he said quietly. "We all did." As Amara knelt beside Mia's wheelchair, she took Mia's hand in hers and spoke gently. "How are you feeling today, Mia?" Mia looked up at her, her eyes full of curiosity and wonder. "I feel good," she said, her voice soft but filled with determination. "I want to walk like the other kids." Amara's heart swelled with emotion, and she gave Mia's hand a gentle squeeze. "You will, sweetie," she said reassuringly. "One day, you'll be able to walk again. But for now, just take things one step at a time." Antonio, who had been quietly observing the interaction, felt something shift inside him. He had spent so much of his life chasing after things that didn't matter. But now, standing there in the park with Mia and Amara, he realized that he had something far more valuable than all the money and power he had accumulated over the years. He had a family, and he was willing to do whatever it took to protect that family, to make sure they had the love and support they needed. As the afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, Antonio pushed Mia's wheelchair along the paved path, her hand resting gently on his. Amara walked alongside them, her presence a comforting reassurance that they were all in this together. They may not have known what the future held, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Antonio had learned to cherish the small moments, the ones that truly made life worth living. And as the day came to a close and they made their way back to the mansion, Antonio made a vow to himself. He would never take his family for granted again. No amount of wealth or power could compare to the love and happiness he felt when he was with Mia and Amara. And from that moment on, he would do everything in his power to make sure they knew just how much they meant to him. The weeks continued to pass in a quiet, almost serene fashion, a stark contrast to the chaotic life that Antonio Romano had once known. He had slowly learned the true value of time spent with family, of small moments that had once been overlooked in favor of power and control. Mia had grown stronger, not physically, but emotionally. The laughter that now filled the mansion was different from the hollow sounds of the past. It was genuine, a sign that things were finally starting to change. One afternoon, Antonio sat in his office, a glass of scotch in his hand, staring out the window. His mind was no longer consumed by business or the demands of his empire. He thought about the future, and more importantly, about Mia and Amara. Both had become central to his life in ways he had never expected. His relationship with Amara had evolved too. She had always been there for Mia, but now, she was a steady presence in his own life as well. He could feel himself growing closer to her, not just out of gratitude, but because of something deeper. She was kind, patient, and wise beyond her years. She had taught him how to care, how to love without conditions. And for the first time in his life, Antonio realized that he had never truly understood love. Love was not about ownership, control, or manipulation. It was about giving, about sacrifice. The realization hit him hard, and he was ashamed to think of all the years he had wasted. Antonio, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Amara standing in the doorway. She had a gentle smile on her face, but her eyes betrayed a concern he wasn't used to seeing from her. "Mia's asking for you," she said, her tone calm but insistent. Antonio nodded and set the glass of scotch down on the desk. "I'll be right there." As he walked through the hallway to Mia's room, he could hear her faint giggles through the door. The sound made his heart swell. It had been a long time since he had heard her so happy. He pushed the door open slowly, and there she was, sitting up in her wheelchair, a smile lighting up her face. "Daddy," Mia called out as soon as she saw him. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Guess what? I can move my fingers now." Antonio's breath caught in his throat. He rushed over to her, kneeling down so that they were eye to eye. "What do you mean, Mia?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Mia held up her hand, her tiny fingers trembling slightly as she tried to move them. "See? I can make them wiggle now. Just like this," she said, grinning ear to ear. Antonio's heart swelled with pride and disbelief. It wasn't much, just the smallest movement, but it was progress. It was hope. "That's amazing, sweetheart," he said, his voice breaking slightly. He gently cupped her hands in his, marveling at the strength it must have taken for her to accomplish even this small feat. "You're getting stronger every day, Mia. I'm so proud of you." Amara stood by the door, watching the scene with quiet approval. She had seen how hard Mia had worked, how she had fought through the pain and the frustration. And now, to see the results of that effort, it filled her with a quiet joy. She had always believed in Mia's strength, but seeing Antonio so openly proud of his daughter was a turning point. It was the moment when Antonio realized that family wasn't just about blood. It was about connection, about being there for each other, no matter what. "I knew you could do it," Amara said softly, walking into the room and kneeling beside Mia. "You've got so much strength in you, Mia." Mia's smile grew even wider at her praise, and for a moment, it felt like the world outside didn't matter. For the first time, it felt like the Romano family was truly whole. Antonio stood up, still holding Mia's hands. "We're going to keep working, okay?" he said, his tone filled with determination. "Whatever it takes, I'll be here for you. We're going to do this together." Mia nodded enthusiastically, her eyes bright with hope. "I'll keep trying, Daddy. I promise." As Antonio stood there, holding his daughter's hands in his, he realized something. It wasn't just about Mia's progress. It wasn't just about her learning to move her fingers again or regaining some of her independence. It was about the connection they shared, about the bond that was growing stronger every day. And in that moment, Antonio knew that he would do anything to protect that bond. His empire, his wealth, and his power meant nothing compared to this. He had learned the hard way that love was the only thing that mattered in the end. As the day went on, Antonio and Amara spent time with Mia in the garden, watching her carefully as she continued to make progress, one small movement at a time. Every time she smiled, every time she reached for something on her own, Antonio's heart swelled with pride. He had never imagined that this would be the life he would lead, but now, he couldn't imagine anything else. With Amara by his side, and Mia's strength and determination fueling him, Antonio knew that they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they were a family, and nothing could break the bond they shared. Days turned into weeks, and as the seasons began to shift, so did the dynamics within the Romano mansion. Antonio, who had once ruled with an iron fist, now found himself drawn to a different kind of power, one rooted in love and understanding. His relationship with Mia had blossomed, as had his bond with Amara. It was a quiet evolution, one that didn't require grand gestures or declarations, but a shift in priorities. Antonio had come to realize that family was more than a word. It was the foundation of everything. Mia had been showing incredible progress, much to the amazement of her doctors. Each day, she became more engaged, more alive, as if the spark inside her was reigniting. She spent time in the garden, her wheelchair now a tool of freedom rather than confinement, as Antonio and Amara helped her navigate the world around her. Her laughter had become a constant sound throughout the mansion, a sound that Antonio cherished deeply. One morning, as the golden rays of the sun poured into the mansion's vast windows, Antonio watched Mia. In the garden from the comfort of his office. She was sitting in her wheelchair near the pond, a book in her lap, but it was her face that caught his attention. She looked so content, so peaceful, a stark contrast to the girl he had once seen lost in sadness and pain. Amara was nearby, of course, as always, guiding Mia gently through her exercises and encouraging her every step of the way. Antonio couldn't help but smile at the sight. He had come to respect Amara in ways he never thought possible. She had not only cared for his daughter, but had also become the silent backbone of their new life. She had taught him more about patience, compassion, and love than anyone else ever could. She had shown him what it meant to truly be present for someone, to put their needs before your own. And though Antonio had always prided himself on his ability to provide and protect, he knew that without Amara, they wouldn't have made it this far. He stood up from his desk and walked toward the garden, his footsteps quiet on the polished floors. When he reached Mia, he stood beside her, his gaze softening as he watched her smile up at him. "How's the book?" he asked, his voice warm. Mia looked up at him with a grin. "It's really good, Daddy," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "It's about a girl who goes on an adventure to find treasure." Antonio's heart swelled with pride. His little girl was dreaming again, and it filled him with a sense of hope he hadn't known in years. "That sounds like a great adventure," he said, leaning down to kiss the top of her head. "Maybe one day, you'll go on an adventure like that." Mia's eyes lit up, and for a moment, it felt like the world was full of possibilities. She looked at Amara, who had been standing by, quietly observing the interaction. "Amara, do you think I can go on an adventure?" she asked. Amara smiled, her eyes softening as she knelt down beside Mia. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "You're stronger than you know." Antonio watched the exchange, his heart swelling. He had never realized how much power a few simple words could have. For Mia, hearing those words from Amara was more than just encouragement. It was a reminder that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. And for Antonio, it was a reminder of the strength Amara had given not only to Mia, but to him as well. He cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't think I ever really understood what family was until now," he said, his words laced with sincerity. "But I get it now, and I want to do whatever it takes to make sure you both have everything you need." Mia's face lit up at his words, and Amara gave him a look that conveyed gratitude and understanding. "We have everything we need, Antonio," Amara said softly, her voice full of warmth. "You're here, That's all that matters. Antonio felt a lump in his throat. He had spent his entire life building an empire, but in the end, it was the small moments like this one, the quiet conversations, the shared smiles, that truly defined his success. As the days passed, Antonio made sure to prioritize these moments. He spent more time with Mia, not just in the garden, but reading with her, playing games, and most importantly, listening to her dreams and aspirations. He wanted her to know that no matter what happened, he would always be there for her. And with Amara by their side, guiding them through the challenges, he knew that they could face anything together. One evening, after dinner, Antonio and Mia sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was a peaceful moment, and for the first time in a long while, Antonio felt content. "You know, Daddy," Mia said, her voice quiet, "I think one day, I'll be able to walk again." Antonio looked at her, his heart filling with pride. "I believe you will, Mia," he said, his voice full of conviction. "And when you do, I'll be there cheering you on every step of the way." Mia smiled up at him, her eyes sparkling with hope. "I can't wait." Antonio leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to fully relax. He had found something that no amount of wealth or power could ever give him, a family that loved and supported him. And that, he realized, was worth more than all the treasures in the world. As the weeks passed, the Romano family began to settle into a new rhythm, one that was filled with moments of peace, growth, and unexpected joy. Antonio had transformed from a ruthless mob boss into a devoted father, and with Amara's steady guidance, Mia was becoming more than just the child who had been trapped in a wheelchair. She was becoming a beacon of hope, not only for herself but for those around her. One evening, as the setting sun cast a warm golden glow across the garden, Antonio found himself reflecting on how far they had come. His empire, once his sole focus, had taken a back seat to something more important, family. And in that moment, he realized that his success, his wealth, and his power were nothing compared to the love he had for his daughter and the woman who had taught him what it truly meant to be a father. Antonio sat at the edge of the garden, watching Mia and Amara. Mia was laughing, her small hands trying to grasp at the butterflies that fluttered around the garden. Amara was right beside her, guiding her gently, her presence calm and comforting. The sight filled Antonio with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had been blind to what truly mattered for so long. Now, he was awake to the most important things in life. As Antonio watched the two women who had come to mean so much to him, he felt a tug at his heart. It was not just the love for his daughter or the admiration he held for Amara. It was the realization that he had been given a second chance. He had been given the opportunity to be the man, the father, he had always wanted to be, and he wasn't about to waste it. That evening, after Mia had been put to bed, Antonio sat alone in his study, the weight of his thoughts pressing on him. He needed to do something to show Mia and Amara how much they meant to him. The feeling of gratitude was overwhelming, and he knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to act. With a sense of determination, Antonio picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Get the best lawyer you can find. I want a trust set up for Mia, something that will ensure her future, no matter what," he said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "I'm done letting the past control us. From now on, we make our own future." As he hung up the phone, a sense of calm washed over him. He had spent so much of his life building his empire, but now he was building something that would last even longer, a legacy of love, security, and protection for the people who truly mattered. The next day, he gathered Mia and Amara in the garden. Mia was sitting in her wheelchair, the bright morning sun lighting up her face, and Amara was standing nearby, her eyes filled with warmth and encouragement. Antonio looked at them both, his heart swelling with emotion. "I want to make sure you both have everything you need," Antonio began, his voice filled with sincerity. "I've spent my life building an empire, but I realize now that the only empire that truly matters is the one we build together. You are my family, and I want to make sure that nothing will ever stand in the way of your happiness and security." Amara looked at him, her heart pounding. She had never expected such a declaration from Antonio. She had always seen him as a man of power, a man who measured success by what he could control. But now, he was speaking from the heart, and it made her realize just how much he had changed. "Antonio," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "You've already given us more than we could ever ask for. You've given us love, support, and a chance at a future we never thought possible." Antonio smiled, his eyes softening. "And I will keep giving that to you," he said firmly. "You're not just my family in name. You're my family in every sense of the word. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect you both, to make sure you never feel alone again." As the days passed, Antonio worked tirelessly to set up a future for Mia, one that would give her the best care possible, no matter what challenges lay ahead. But more than that, he focused on being the father Mia deserved, the father who showed up for every moment, no matter how small. The father who wasn't just a figure of authority, but a source of love, encouragement, and understanding. And as for Amara, her role in their lives grew even more important. She was no longer just a nanny, she was a part of the family. Together, the three of them forged a bond that was unbreakable, built not on blood, but on love, sacrifice, and the unwavering belief that no challenge was too great when they faced it together. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Antonio looked at Mia and Amara across the table, a sense of peace settling over him. Mia was talking about her day, laughing about the small victories she had achieved, while Amara listened intently, her smile a constant source of comfort. Antonio couldn't help but smile, knowing that this was the life he had always wanted, the life he had never thought possible. He had everything he needed right here, in this room. His empire no longer mattered. What mattered was the love they shared, the future they were building, and the moments they were creating together. And as the evening wore on, Antonio made a silent vow to never take this happiness for granted. He had everything he had ever wanted, not in his empire, but in his family. And that, he realized, was more than enough. As the days turned into weeks, the Romano family began to build a life that was once unimaginable to Antonio. The mansion, which had once echoed with the sounds of business deals, mafia negotiations, and the constant hum of power, was now filled with laughter, love, and a sense of peace. Mia continued to show signs of improvement, her physical therapy progressing slowly but steadily. Each day, she became more engaged with the world around her, her eyes brighter, her laughter louder, and her spirit stronger. Antonio could see the transformation in her. She was no longer the quiet, sad girl she had been when she first arrived at the mansion. Now, she was a young girl filled with hope, determination, and dreams. Antonio couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. He had been there for every small victory, every new milestone Mia had reached, and he was more committed than ever to ensuring that she would never feel alone. And through it all, Amara had been by his side, guiding both of them with her calm, unwavering presence. Amara had always been the one constant in their lives, the one who had held everything together when Antonio had been too focused on his empire to see what truly mattered. But now, Antonio saw her differently. She was no longer just the nanny who cared for his daughter. She was a partner, a friend, and, in many ways, the heart of their family. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Antonio stood on the balcony overlooking the garden. He had been reflecting on the journey they had all been on, the challenges they had faced, and the progress they had made. He had spent so much of his life focused on building his empire, but now he realized that the real treasure was here, in this house, with Mia and Amara. The thought made him smile. He had finally found what he had been searching for all along. As he stood there lost in thought, he felt a presence behind him. He turned to find Amara standing in the doorway, her expression calm, but filled with something he couldn't quite place. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice soft, almost as if she had known exactly what he was thinking. Antonio smiled, a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes. "I've been thinking about how far we've come," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "About how much things have changed, not just for Mia, but for all of us." Amara walked over to him, her eyes full of understanding. "It's been a journey," she said quietly, "but it's been worth it." Antonio nodded, his gaze falling on the garden below. "I used to think that everything I needed was in my empire, in my wealth, in my power," he said. "But now, I know that none of that matters without you and Mia. You both are my world now." Amara felt a lump form in her throat at his words. She had always known that Antonio had the potential for greatness, but she had never imagined he would come to understand the importance of family, of love, and of connection in the way he had. We've always been a family, Antonio, she said softly. Even when it was just Mia and me. We didn't need anything else. Antonio looked at her, his expression sincere. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for us, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You've given me more than I could have ever asked for. You've given me a chance to be the father I was always meant to be. Amara smiled gently, her heart swelling at his words. You've always been a good father, Antonio, she said. You just had to see it for yourself. Antonio reached out, taking her hand in his. I want to do something for you, he said, his voice filled with determination. I want to make sure that you never feel like you're just the nanny again. You're part of this family, and I want to make sure you know that. Amara's eyes softened, her heart beating faster at the sincerity in his words. Antonio, I don't need anything, she said gently. Being here with you and Mia is enough for me. Antonio shook his head. No, you deserve more than that. You've been with us through everything, and I don't want you to ever feel like you're less than a member of this family. He squeezed her hand gently, his eyes filled with sincerity. I'm going to make sure you have everything you need, Amara. I want you to know that, no matter what. Amara's heart swelled with emotion, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She had always known that Antonio had a deep sense of loyalty, but hearing him say these words made her realize just how far he had come. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. I don't know what to say. Antonio smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. You don't need to say anything, he said softly. Just know that you're part of this family, always. As the evening wore on, Antonio, Amara, and Mia sat together in the living room, talking, laughing, and simply enjoying each other's company. It was a simple evening, but it was one that Antonio would cherish forever. He had found what he had been searching for all along, a family, and nothing, not even the weight of his past, could ever take that away from him. In that moment, he realized that the love they shared was the true power in his life. It was the one thing that no one could ever take from him. And as he looked at Mia and Amara, he knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together as a family. As the months passed, the Romano family settled into a newfound peace. The mansion, once a place of constant scheming and tension, now felt more like a home. Antonio had grown into his role as a father in a way he never imagined. He spent his days with Mia, encouraging her to keep moving forward, no matter how slow the progress. The bond between them had deepened, and Antonio found himself cherishing every moment with her. Amara, too, had become a fixture in their lives. She was no longer just Mia's caregiver. She had become a partner in everything. Antonio trusted her with more than just Mia's well-being. He trusted her with his heart. But as with all families, challenges still lurked on the horizon. One evening, as they all sat together in the living room, Antonio's phone rang. The moment was so normal, so serene, that the sudden intrusion of the ringtone made everyone pause. Antonio glanced at the screen and saw the name of his longtime business associate flashing on the display. He hesitated for a moment before answering. Antonio, the voice on the other end said, tension thick in his tone. We need to talk. It's about the business. Antonio's expression immediately shifted. He had promised Mia and Amara that he was done with the violence, the power plays, the endless games. He had built something more valuable in his family, and he wasn't about to risk that for anything. I'm no longer interested in the business, Antonio said firmly, his voice calm but resolute. I'm done with all of that. There was a pause on the other end of the line before his associate spoke again, a hint of disbelief in his voice. You're serious? Antonio nodded, though no one could see him. I'm serious. I'm making a different life now. A life for my daughter and for Amara. I'm putting the family first. The voice on the other end was quiet for a moment. I understand. But there are things you can't just walk away from. People don't forget who you are. Antonio's jaw tightened. He had always known this day would come. The day when his past would rear its ugly head. But this time, he wasn't afraid. I'm not running, but I'm not looking for trouble either. Tell the others, I'm done. As he hung up the phone, a quiet sense of finality settled over him. For the first time in years, he felt in control of his own destiny. He had chosen his family over everything else. The next few weeks were marked by a newfound sense of peace in the Romano household. Antonio focused on Mia's therapy, continuing to support her progress. Mia, once confined to a wheelchair, now moved with more confidence, her fingers gaining strength, her spirits lifting. She still had a long road ahead, but the light in her eyes made it clear that anything was possible. Amara, ever the steady presence, worked closely with Antonio, helping to create a stable, loving environment for Mia. The three of them, father, daughter, and caretaker, formed a tight-knit unit, bound by love and trust. One afternoon, as the golden light of late afternoon streamed through the windows, Antonio found himself standing in the garden, watching Mia and Amara. Mia was seated near the fountain, her wheelchair pushed up to the edge, as Amara helped her take in the beauty of the garden. It was a simple moment, yet it meant everything. Antonio stood there for a long time, just watching, feeling the weight of the decision he had made. He had given up the life of power and control, and in return, he had gained something far more valuable: peace, love, and the unwavering loyalty of his family. As he stood there, he realized that he had found the one thing he had been searching for all along. It wasn't in the deals he had made, the money he had accumulated, or the power he had wielded. It was in the moments like these, simple, quiet, full of love and connection. The past few months had been a journey, one that had forced Antonio to confront the man he had been and the man he wanted to become. It hadn't been easy, and it certainly hadn't been quick, but it had been worth it. Antonio turned and walked toward Mia and Amara, his heart light. "You two look happy," he said, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Mia looked up at him, her eyes shining. "We are, Daddy," she said, her voice full of warmth. "It's the best day ever." Antonio bent down, placing a hand on her shoulder, his gaze softening. "I'm glad," he said quietly. "I'm glad you're happy." As he looked at Amara, her steady gaze meeting his, he knew that they had built something beautiful together. They had made it through the darkness, and now they were finally in the light. Antonio knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together as a family. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the people he loved, Antonio Romano felt a peace he had never known. He had made his choice, and there was nothing left to fear. The days that followed were filled with a sense of quiet fulfillment. Antonio had made his choice, and he was committed to it with every fiber of his being. His empire, once the center of his world, had become a distant memory, replaced by the love and responsibility he now felt toward Mia and Amara. Each morning, he woke with a renewed sense of purpose, eager to spend time with his daughter, to watch her grow, and to help her overcome the obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. Mia's progress was nothing short of remarkable. The therapist had been amazed at the strength she was gaining in her fingers, and her ability to move more fluidly in her wheelchair was a sign of the hard work she had put in. Antonio had witnessed her small victories every day. The way her eyes lit up when she reached for a flower in the garden, the sound of her laughter as she played with Amara, and the proud smile on her face when she accomplished a new goal. It filled Antonio's heart with a pride he had never known before. He had watched Mia struggle for so long, and now, to see her thriving, was a gift he had never imagined. Amara had been an integral part of this transformation. She had always been there for Mia, providing not only care, but a sense of stability and love that had allowed Mia to heal. But it wasn't just Mia who had grown. Antonio had changed too. He had found a purpose in his family, a reason to fight for something other than power. His bond with Amara had deepened, and though neither of them had ever spoken of it aloud, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were partners, not just in caring for Mia, but in life. One evening, as the three of them sat in the living room, talking about everything and nothing, Antonio felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. This was the life he had always wanted, and now, for the first time, he could truly appreciate it. Mia was telling them about the new book she was reading, her excitement bubbling over as she described the characters and their adventures. Amara listened intently, offering small comments here and there that encouraged Mia to keep going. Antonio watched them both, his heart full. There was no room for regrets in his life anymore. All that mattered was the family they had become. After a few minutes, he stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the garden. The sun had set, casting the sky in shades of purple and orange. It was a beautiful sight, one that he had grown to love. But tonight, something felt different. It wasn't just the view or the quiet peace of the evening. It was the realization that for the first time, he truly felt content. He didn't need the wealth, the power, or the endless cycle of violence that had defined his life for so long. He had everything he needed right here with Mia and Amara. He turned back to them, a smile on his face. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady, "about everything, about how much has changed, and how much more I want to do for you both." Amara looked up from the book she was holding, her eyes soft with concern. "What do you mean?" she asked. Antonio walked back to the couch, sitting down next to her. "I want to make sure you both have everything you need," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I've spent my life building an empire, but now I want to build something that really matters. I want to build a future for us, a future that's about love and security, not power or fear." Mia, who had been listening intently, looked up at him with wide eyes. "What kind of future, Daddy?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Antonio smiled, his heart swelling at the sight of her innocence. "A future where we don't have to worry about anything," he said gently. "Where you can be whatever you want to be, and where you never have to feel like you're less than anyone else. Where we can be happy and safe and together." Amara reached over, taking Antonio's hand in hers. "That sounds perfect," she said softly. "We already have everything we need, Antonio. But I know what you mean. It's not about things. It's about love, and it's about being here for each other." Antonio squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with appreciation. "I want to make sure you know that you're a part of this family, Amara. You've always been there for Mia, for me. And I want you to know that I'm here for you, too." Amara's heart swelled with emotion at his words. She had never expected this from Antonio, but hearing him say it made her realize just how far they had come. "You don't have to say that," she said quietly. "I know how much you care. We're a family, Antonio. That's all that matters." Antonio nodded, his gaze softening. "You're right," he said. "We are a family, and that's the most important thing in the world." As the evening wore on, they sat together, talking about their hopes for the future. It was a simple moment, but one that Antonio would treasure forever. He had finally found what he had been searching for all his life. A family to call his own, a place where he was loved and needed. And for the first time, he knew that he would do whatever it took to protect that love, to build a future where Mia and Amara could thrive, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The following weeks brought a sense of stability that Antonio had never experienced before. Each day, his family continued to grow closer, the bond between him, Mia, and Amara solidifying in ways he hadn't imagined possible. They were a team, united by love and a shared commitment to the future they were building together. It wasn't easy, of course. Antonio's past still loomed over him like a shadow, and old associates occasionally surfaced, seeking his attention. But Antonio had made his decision, and he wasn't going to let anyone drag him back into the life he had left behind. One afternoon, as Antonio sat in his study, a knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up to see Amara standing in the doorway, her expression thoughtful. "Antonio," she began, her voice soft but serious. "Mia has been asking a lot of questions lately." Antonio raised an eyebrow, sensing the weight behind her words. "What kind of questions?" he asked, his tone cautious. "She's been asking about her mother," Amara explained, walking into the room and sitting down across from him. "She doesn't really remember much about her, but I can tell that she's wondering why she's never around, why we never talk about her." Antonio's heart tightened at the mention of Mia's mother. It had been years since her death, but the pain of that loss had never truly gone away. Mia had been so young when her mother passed, and Antonio had made the choice to shield her from the harsh truths about what had happened. He had buried the memories, focusing only on raising Mia and providing for her. But now, it seemed like the time had come to face the past. "I don't want to upset her," Antonio said quietly, "but I don't know how to explain it to her." Amara nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "It's a difficult conversation to have, but I think it's important that she knows the truth. She deserves to understand, especially now that she's getting older." Antonio sat in silence for a long moment, contemplating the best way to approach the situation. He had never been one for talking about feelings, especially when it came to the painful parts of his life. But Mia was growing up, and it was time for him to be honest with her. He couldn't protect her from everything forever. "You're right," he finally said, his voice steady. "She deserves to know." Later that evening, after Mia had finished her dinner and was settling in for her nightly routine, Antonio sat down beside her on the couch. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and trusting, as always. "Daddy, are we going to the park tomorrow?" she asked, her voice filled with excitement. Antonio smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We will, sweetheart," he said gently. "But first, I need to talk to you about something important." Mia tilted her head, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What is it, Daddy?" she asked, her voice quiet now. Antonio took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I know you've been asking about your mother," he began slowly. "And I think it's time you know the truth." Mia's eyes widened, her small hands nervously clutching the edge of her blanket. Antonio reached out, taking her hand in his, trying to offer her the same comfort he had always given her. "Your mother was a wonderful person," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She loved you more than anything in this world. But things were complicated. She passed away when you were very young, and it's something I've never really talked about with you." Mia's brow furrowed as she listened intently, her eyes searching his face for understanding. "But why don't we ever talk about her, Daddy?" she asked, her voice soft. Antonio felt a pang in his chest at the innocence in her question. "I didn't want to upset you, Mia," he explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought it would be easier for you if we just focused on the present, on us. But now, I realize that you need to know the truth." Mia was quiet for a long time, her small fingers curling around his. Antonio could see the wheels turning in her mind, the questions forming, the confusion settling in. "I miss her," Mia said softly, her voice barely audible. "I don't remember her, but I miss her. I wish she was here." Antonio's heart broke at the sound of her words. He pulled her into a tight hug, holding her close as she rested her head against his chest. "I know you do, Mia," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I miss her too. But you know what? She would be so proud of you. She would be so happy to see how strong and brave you've become." Mia sniffled, her small body shaking slightly as she held on to him. "I want to be just like her," she said, her voice filled with determination. Antonio pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. "You already are, sweetheart," he said, his voice full of pride. "You're kind, you're strong, and you have a heart full of love. She would be proud of you every single day." Mia smiled faintly, her eyes shining with a mix of sadness and hope. "I miss her," she whispered again, more to herself than to Antonio. Antonio kissed the top of her head gently. "I know, sweetheart. I know." The conversation was difficult, but it was the first step in giving Mia the space she needed to understand the past and move forward. Antonio knew it wouldn't be the last time they talked about her mother, but it was a start. And in that moment, he realized just how important honesty and connection were. He had always protected Mia, but now he saw that sometimes the best way to protect her was to give her the truth, no matter how hard it might be. The days ahead would bring more challenges, but Antonio knew that together, as a family, they could face anything. And no matter what, they would always have each other. Antonio, Mia, and Amara, united by love, built on trust, and ready to face the future together. The weeks following that difficult conversation with Mia were filled with a quiet, but undeniable shift in the household. Antonio had always been a man of action, someone who could control everything around him with an iron fist, but now he found himself navigating new terrain, his emotions, his relationship with his daughter, and the way he saw the world. The past no longer held the same power over him. He had faced it, acknowledged it, and moved forward with Mia and Amara by his side. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of his empire, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where love and peace were allowed to flourish. As he spent more time with Mia, he began to notice the small victories that were happening every day. She had become more confident, her therapy sessions progressing steadily. Her physical strength was improving, but so was her emotional resilience. The conversations they had were no longer just about her struggles, but about her dreams and hopes for the future. Mia had asked about school, about making friends, about things she hadn't thought about before. It was a sign that she was looking ahead, and Antonio couldn't have been more proud. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Mia had her favorite book in her lap, flipping through the pages with a quiet focus. Antonio sat beside her, watching her with admiration. Amara was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, her soft hum of a tune blending with the clinking of pots and pans. It was a peaceful moment, one that Antonio had come to cherish. As he watched Mia, he realized how far they had come. She had gone from a child who had been filled with sorrow and confusion to a young girl filled with hope and excitement for what the future might hold. Antonio reached over, placing his hand gently on hers. She looked up at him, her face lighting up with a smile. "What are you thinking, Daddy?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity. Antonio smiled back, his heart swelling with love. "I was just thinking about how proud I am of you," he said softly. "You've come such a long way, Mia. I see so much strength in you." Mia's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with happiness. "I'm strong because you believe in me, Daddy," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "I wouldn't be here if you didn't." Antonio felt a lump in his throat as her words sank in. He had always thought of himself as the protector, the provider. But it was Mia who had shown him the true meaning of strength. "You've always been strong, sweetheart," Antonio said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've shown me what real strength is. And I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Just as the words left his mouth, Amara entered the room, carrying a tray of food. She set it down on the table and looked at both of them with a soft smile. "It's nice to see you two talking like this," she said, her voice warm. "It feels like everything is coming together." Antonio turned to her, his expression softening. "It is coming together, thanks to you," he said, his tone full of gratitude. "I don't know where we'd be without you, Amara." Amara smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We're all in this together, Antonio," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "We've always been a family, even before we realized it." As they sat down to eat, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: school, books, and the little things that made Mia laugh. It was a moment of pure joy, and Antonio soaked it in, realizing that this was the life he had always wanted. No more dealing with ruthless business deals, no more violent confrontations, no more cold, lonely nights. He had a family now, and that was worth more than anything he had ever achieved in his past life. As the evening wore on and they finished their meal, Antonio found himself reflecting on everything that had changed. He had been a man driven by power and control, but now he was driven by something far more powerful: love. It was the love he had for Mia, the love he shared with Amara, and the love they had built together. The next day, Antonio made a decision. He called a meeting with his old business associates, the ones who still tried to pull him back into the world he had left behind. He was done. He would no longer be a part of their world. The life he had once lived was gone, and there was no turning back. When he met with them, they were surprised, but Antonio was resolute. "I'm out," he said firmly. "I've made my choice. I'm not coming back. The future I want is with my family. That's all that matters now." As he walked out of the meeting, Antonio felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt free. He had made peace with his past, and now, he was building a future that was about love, family, and hope. As he drove back to the mansion, he thought about the conversations he had with Mia, about the way she was beginning to see the world. She was no longer defined by her disability. She was defined by her strength, her courage, and her dreams. And he, as her father, would do everything in his power to help her achieve those dreams. When he returned home, he walked into the living room where Mia and Amara were sitting, waiting for him. Mia looked up at him, her face filled with anticipation. "What happened, Daddy?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Antonio smiled, walking over to them. "We're free," he said, his voice filled with peace. "We can finally start building the future we deserve." Mia's face lit up, and Amara's eyes glistened with tears. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, hope, and the promise of a brighter future. And as Antonio stood there, with Mia and Amara by his side, he knew that nothing else mattered. They had everything they needed, and together, they would face whatever the future held. The days continued to pass peacefully, each one blending into the next as Antonio, Mia, and Amara moved forward, building a life filled with love, hope, and unbreakable bonds. The mansion, which had once felt like a place of secrets and isolation, was now a home, warm, filled with laughter and the quiet hum of everyday life. Antonio's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. No longer driven by the desire for power and control, he was now focused on his family, giving them everything he had and more. He was a man at peace, at last, with himself and his choices. He had left behind the world of crime and violence, choosing instead to build something meaningful. The past no longer haunted him. He had his future, and it was all that mattered. Mia's growth continued, each day marking another small victory. Her strength, both physical and emotional, had blossomed. The therapy sessions, once a grueling task, had turned into opportunities for progress, and she was regaining more independence every day. There were moments when she still struggled, but with her father and Amara by her side, Mia faced each obstacle with resilience. One afternoon, as the warm sun filtered through the garden, Antonio watched Mia in her wheelchair, her fingers lightly grazing the flowers that lined the path. Amara stood nearby, a reassuring presence, always close but giving Mia the space to explore. Antonio had seen the difference in Mia over the months. She was no longer just a little girl trapped by her disability. She was a young woman with dreams, with hope, and most importantly, with a future. And that future would be filled with whatever she wanted, no limits, no boundaries. Antonio approached Mia, his heart swelling with pride. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" he asked, kneeling down beside her. Mia looked up at him, her eyes full of excitement. "I was thinking about what I want to do when I grow up," she said, her voice light with possibility. Antonio smiled, his chest tight with emotion. "And what's that?" he asked, knowing that she had a world of potential waiting for her. "I want to be a scientist," Mia said, her voice full of conviction. "I want to figure out how to help people like me, so they can walk again, or do whatever they want." Antonio's eyes shimmered with pride. "I have no doubt you'll be a great scientist," he said softly, his voice full of love. "Whatever you want to be, you will be." Amara, who had been watching from a distance, joined them. She placed a hand on Mia's shoulder, her eyes filled with warmth. "I think that's a beautiful dream, Mia," she said. "And I believe you can do anything you set your mind to." The three of them sat there in the garden, the air thick with love and possibility. For the first time in a long time, Antonio allowed himself to imagine the future. He wasn't thinking about the battles of his past or the mistakes he had made. He was thinking about his daughter's future, about the life they would build together, and about the love that had healed them all. As the sun began to set, casting a soft glow over the garden, Antonio stood up and looked at the two people who meant everything to him. "I'm proud of both of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've changed my life in ways I can't even explain. I'll spend every day making sure you both have everything you need." Mia reached up, taking his hand in hers. "We already have everything we need, Daddy," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "We have each other." Antonio smiled, his heart full. "Yes, we do," he said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. "We have each other. And that's all that matters." They sat together for a while, just enjoying the peace of the evening, the warmth of the sun fading as the night crept in. It was a quiet moment, but one that held more meaning than words could ever express. Antonio had lived a life full of power and ambition, but now, surrounded by the people he loved, he understood that true fulfillment came from love and family, not from wealth or control. The future was uncertain, but with Mia and Amara by his side, Antonio knew that no challenge would ever be too great. They would face it together, as a family, and nothing could break their bond. As the stars began to appear in the sky, Antonio looked up, his heart at peace. He had everything he had ever wanted. A family that loved him, a daughter with a bright future ahead of her, and the knowledge that, no matter what, they would face the world together. The life he had once known was gone, and in its place, he had found something far more valuable. He had found his purpose, and that purpose, he realized, was to love, protect, and cherish the people who had given him everything. With Mia's hand in his and Amara's steady presence beside them, Antonio knew that the story of their family had just begun. And whatever came next, they would face it together, stronger than ever before. In this heartfelt tale of love and transformation, Antonio Romano, once a powerful mob boss, finds himself embracing the simple joys of family life. After leaving behind his ruthless past, he focuses on raising his daughter Mia and building a future with Amara, the woman who has become a steadfast presence in both of their lives. As Mia progresses in her recovery, Antonio's world is reshaped, not by his wealth or power, but by love, understanding, and the deep bond he shares with his daughter and Amara. This journey of healing and rediscovery is one of the most touching romance stories, showing that true happiness comes not from riches, but from the love we give and receive. Together, they face the challenges of their past, with Antonio realizing that a fulfilling life is one filled with kindness, care, and a strong family connection. These romance stories depict not just love between couples, but the enduring love that binds families together, transcending hardship and sacrifice. The changing dynamics of their family and the growth of each character is what makes this one of the most moving romance stories you'll experience. As Antonio fully commits to a new life, he understands that love is the greatest treasure, and protecting his family is the most important thing he can do. This is not just another romance story. It is a testament to the power of transformation through love and how it can change lives in ways we never expect.